for the Department of Homeland Security. That continuing resolution doesn't resolve this issue, but continues to fund the Homeland Security Department. We think that continuing resolution should be for a year. Both options would receive 60 votes in the Senate and in the House and would get us home in time for the Christmas holiday, which I know many people want to do. I've heard that from many of my Republican friends. As I said, either option would keep the government funded over Christmas, because we don't want to see the government shut down over Christmas, even though President Trump seems to brag that he wants one. The only way, the one and only way, we approach a shutdown is if President Trump refuses both of our proposals and demands $5 billion or more for a border wall. The wall request is a non-starter for many reasons. Here are three. First, when President Trump proposed this as a candidate, he said, "Mark my words, I'll have Mexico pay for that wall." The idea that the American taxpayer now has to foot the bill doesn't make sense. Second, there's no plan for the wall. They haven't said where they want to build it, how high it is. I don't like any wall, let me make clear. But how can you spend $5 billion when there's no plan? It shows that this is sort of political fodder for President Trump. It appeals to his base, but he doesn't even care that much that his whole government, his whole administration has not submitted any specific plans. And third, last year, we put $3.45 billion in Homeland Security for border security. Not a nickel of that has been spent on a wall. It couldn't be. The language didn't allow it. But virtually none of it's been spent at all. They still have that $1.34 billion they haven't even spent the vast majority of. And already they're demanding $5 billion more. Some would say even demanding $1.6 billion more is too much. But the idea that they haven't spent last year's money and they're demanding such a huge amount this year makes no sense at all. To ask the American taxpayer to foot the bill for an unplanned, unnecessary, ineffective border is just preposterous. We know why President Trump is doing this, like he does so many things. It's a throwaway idea to fire up his base, and I'm ashamed that my Republican colleagues who know better are going along. So if President Trump wants to throw a temper tantrum and shut down the government over Christmas, over the wall, that's his decision. But there are two sensible options on the table to avoid one. Two sensible options. And we do not want to let a Trump temper tantrum govern our policies or cause the shutdown of a government which everyone on both sides of the aisles knows is the wrong idea. One final point. By letting the president's demands get in the way, my Republican colleagues are in effect ceding Congress's authority over the appropriations process to the president. Leader McConnell has repeatedly said he wants regular order on appropriations in the Senate. And in fact, that's been one of the few bipartisan high moments that this Senate has had. Last year, we passed a good appropriations process, came together on an omnibus. This year, we funded close to three-quarters of the government already, bipartisan, passed by large majority. That's how it should work. Well, it should work the same way for the Department of Homeland Security. Regular order would dictate that the Senate consider the bipartisan DHS appropriations bill passed out of committee, agreed to by both parties, here on the floor. In the meantime, the 6 other bipartisan appropriation bills, also agreed to by both parties, are being held hostage over this, unnecessarily, to any objective observer. So, if my friend, Leader McConnell, is so concerned about regular order, He'd bring up the remaining appropriations bills as agreed to for a vote. And he would tell President Trump that the bipartisan conference bill, the bipartisan compromise, or a CR, are the ways to go to avoid a shutdown. On another matter, yesterday, all 49 Democrats voted against considering the nomination of Bernard McNamee to the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee, and that was for good reason. McNamee spent the bulk of his career boosting fossil fuels and slandering renewable energy. His views are so anachronistic, regressive, and counterfactual that I'm sure most of my Republican colleagues wouldn't agree with them. He's lied about how renewable energies impact the electric grid. He's called support for clean energy, quote, organized propaganda, and pitched the debate between fossil fuels and renewables, in his words, as a clash between liberty and tyranny. My Republican friends, these words sound absurd. You'd think that I were making them up because it would so vilify Mr. McNamee. But my Republican friends can see every one of these statements that he made on video. At a time when our country is plagued by wildfires and flooding, at a time when more powerful storms and hurricanes buffet our coasts, at a time when average Americans are feeling the devastating effects of climate change right now, we should not elevate someone so biased in favor of fossil fuels that caused these problems in the first place. So we have a final vote today. Every Democrat's voted no. We need one Republican to switch to defeat this awful nomination. I hope my colleagues will think about it. Please, look up the record. Don't just listen to my speech. Just look at what this man has said. And I think a good number of you might want to vote no. On the front page of the New York Times this morning, there's a report about how the emission of greenhouse gases has actually accelerated in the past few years. Climate change is going to be the defining issue, a defining issue of our generation, a defining issue in future elections as well. And the vote on McNamee clearly shows the difference between the two parties on the issue of climate change right now. Democrats believe we need to address climate change with bold and substantial action. We cannot wait until a later day. We can't keep approving folks like McNamee to influence energy policy. We need to act. Meanwhile, too many of our Republican colleagues pretend the issue doesn't even exist. And that is sad. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session and resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Bernard L. McNamee of Virginia to be a member.
This order, the time until 12 noon will be equally divided between the two leaders or their designees.